The story begins on the morning that should have been the proudest day in House Ravenscroft history. Sunlight poured through the towering windows of Ravenscroft Manor, casting golden patterns across polished marble floors. Servants hurried through the halls carrying fresh flowers, silver trays, and lengths of embroidered silk. Outside, noble carriages lined the circular drive, while musicians tuned their instruments beneath the grand entrance. Every corner of the estate had been prepared to welcome one of the most powerful men in the kingdom. Today, Duke Lucian Ashcombe was coming to claim his bride. Yet behind the elegant doors of the manor, panic had replaced celebration. Lady Margaret Ravenscroft stood in the center of her daughter's lavish bedchamber, her face drained of color. Dresses were scattered across the floor, jewelry boxes lay open, and every wardrobe had been searched twice. "Look again," she cried. She cannot have simply vanished. A trembling maid held out a folded letter. "My lady, we found this on Lady Isabella's dressing table." Lord Theodore Ravenscroft snatched the paper before anyone else could touch it. His hands shook as he unfolded it. "Father, mother, I cannot marry a man I have never loved. I refuse to spend my life with a cold duke simply to satisfy our family's ambitions. By the time you read this, I will already be far away. Do not search for me, Isabella." Silence settled over the room. Then came Lord Ravenscroft's furious roar. "She has ruined us." Lady Margaret collapsed into a chair, pressing a lace handkerchief against her lips. "What will become of our family? The Duke will think we deceived him." A steward stepped cautiously into the room. "My lord, Duke Ashcombe's escort has crossed the Eastern Bridge. They will arrive within the hour." Every noble in the room paled. Rejecting an ordinary suitor might invite gossip. Humiliating Duke Lucian Ashcombe could destroy an entire family. His influence stretched across the kingdom. Though respected for protecting the northern borders through years of military service, he was equally famous for his stern nature. Few people could claim to know him personally. Fewer still had ever seen him smile. Some called him emotionless. Others simply called him the Cold Duke. Lord Ravenscroft paced furiously. There must be another solution. "We could claim Isabella has fallen ill," Lady Margaret suggested. "The royal physician would expose the lie. We could postpone the ceremony." He would never agree. "What if we explain everything? And admit that our daughter abandoned him?" Lord Ravenscroft snapped. He would never forgive such humiliation. No answer came. Across the hallway, unnoticed by almost everyone, another daughter quietly listened. Lady Eliza Ravenscroft stood beside a tall window overlooking the rose gardens. At 23, she possessed a calm elegance that rarely attracted attention in fashionable society. Her golden blonde hair was gathered into a simple braid beneath a pale blue ribbon, and her modest ivory gown lacked the extravagant jewels chosen for her younger sister. She had not been invited into the discussion. She rarely was. Ever since childhood, Isabella had been the family's shining star. When Isabella learned to dance, guests applauded. When Eliza mastered 3 languages, no celebration followed. When Isabella sang at spring festivals, everyone praised her voice. When Eliza spent long afternoons reading estate records beside her grandfather, people joked that she cared too much for boring matters. Her parents always insisted they loved both daughters equally. Their actions had quietly told another story. Even the servants noticed. Mrs. Hawthorne, the elderly housekeeper who had watched both girls grow up, approached Eliza with worried eyes. "My lady, perhaps it is better if you remain in your room today." Eliza offered her a gentle smile. "They will need every pair of hands they have." Mrs. Hawthorne sighed softly. "You always think of others first." Eliza only smiled. She had learned long ago that bitterness accomplished very little. Instead of seeking attention, she found purpose elsewhere. She helped the gardeners choose stronger roses after winter frosts. She visited tenant families whose children were ill. She quietly taught reading lessons to young servants after supper. No one in high society spoke about those things. But the people who truly knew House Ravenscroft often whispered that the elder daughter possessed a kinder heart. Another loud argument erupted from the drawing room. Eliza stepped inside. Her parents barely noticed her arrival. Lord Ravenscroft was busy listing every noble family that might be offended by today's disaster. Lady Margaret wrung her hands in despair. What are we to do? Eliza waited until the room grew quiet. Then she spoke in her usual calm voice. I heard you needed a bride. Every conversation stopped. Several relatives stared as though they had forgotten another daughter existed. Lady Margaret blinked twice. What did you say? Eliza folded her hands neatly before her. I said, I heard you needed a bride. For a heartbeat, no one reacted. Then one of her aunts gave a nervous laugh. This is hardly the time for jokes. I wasn't joking. Lord Ravenscroft frowned. You cannot possibly mean yourself. I do. Lady Margaret stared at her eldest daughter as though seeing her for the first time. You would marry Duke Ashcombe? If doing so protects our family from disgrace, yes. Another stunned silence filled the room. Lord Ravenscroft looked uncertain. The Duke requested Isabella. He requested a Ravenscroft daughter. Eliza answered quietly. The marriage contract names our house. If he refuses me, that choice will belong to him, not to us. The relatives exchanged uneasy glances. For years they had dismissed Eliza as quiet and unremarkable. Yet at this moment, she was the only person offering a solution. Lady Margaret slowly stood. You understand what people say about him? I have heard the rumors. They say he has no warmth. I have never expected warmth from marriage. Her simple answer left even her father speechless. Inside, Eliza felt no excitement, nor fear, only certainty. There was little keeping her at Ravenscroft Manor. She had spent years living like a guest in the home where she had been born. If the Duke rejected her, nothing would change. If he accepted, perhaps she might finally belong somewhere. Outside, the sound of approaching horses echoed through the estate. A servant hurried into the hall. My lord, his grace has arrived. The enormous front doors opened. Boots struck polished stone with measured confidence. Every servant bowed. Every noble straightened. Duke Lucian Ashcombe entered wearing a dark charcoal military coat embroidered with silver thread, his broad shoulders carrying the quiet authority of a man accustomed to command. At 32, he possessed a composed expression that revealed little, steel gray eyes that missed almost nothing, and a reputation that made even seasoned nobles choose their words carefully. Though undeniably handsome, there was a distance about him, as if years of duty had taught him to keep the world at arm's length. He removed his gloves with deliberate calm and inclined his head. Lord Ravenscroft. Your Grace, Lord Ravenscroft replied, forcing a smile that fooled no one. Lucian's gaze swept across the room. The musicians had stopped playing. The servants avoided eye contact. Even the flowers seemed to wilt beneath the heavy silence. Something was wrong. His voice remained steady. Has something delayed today's ceremony? Lord Ravenscroft swallowed. There's a matter we must explain. Lucian listened without interruption as the truth was laid before him. When the confession ended, the room held its breath. Everyone expected anger or cold dismissal. Instead, the Duke remained perfectly still. After a long moment, his gaze shifted past Lord Ravenscroft and settled on Eliza. She neither lowered her eyes nor tried to impress him. She simply met his gaze with quiet composure. For several silent seconds, neither spoke. Then, to everyone's astonishment, the corner of Lucian's mouth lifted in the faintest smirk. Maybe, he said evenly, you. A collective gasp swept through the room. Lady Margaret nearly lost her balance. Lord Ravenscroft blinked in disbelief. Eliza herself looked momentarily surprised, though she quickly regained her calm. Lucian stepped closer. If you are offering by your own choice, he said, then I will hear your answer directly. Eliza held his gaze. I am offering willingly, your grace. He studied her for another moment before giving a single nod. Then let us not waste a day. The forgotten sister, who had spent a lifetime unnoticed, had just become the future Duchess of Ashcombe, the Duchess everyone underestimated. The journey to Ashcombe Castle lasted 3 days. Neither Eliza nor Lucian spoke more than necessary. They shared polite conversations over meals, discussed travel arrangements, and exchanged brief remarks whenever the weather changed, but long silences filled the carriage. Surprisingly, those silences never felt uncomfortable. They simply reflected two people who had spent years hiding their thoughts from the world. When the towering walls of Ashcombe Castle finally appeared above the mist-covered hills, Eliza understood why people called it the Cold Castle. Its gray stone towers reached into the cloudy sky like silent guardians. Beautiful gardens surrounded the estate, yet many flower beds had withered from neglect. The fountain stood still, and even the servants moved the courtyards with quiet caution, as though laughter itself had been forbidden. Rows of servants bowed as their carriage stopped. "Welcome home, Your Grace." Lucian stepped down first before offering Eliza his hand. She accepted with a graceful smile. The servants exchanged surprised glances. No previous duchess had ever stood beside the Duke. Inside the grand entrance hall, the castle steward introduced himself. "My name is Mr. Whitmore. If Her Grace requires anything, the household is at your service." Eliza smiled warmly. "Thank you, Mr. Whitmore. I hope we'll work well together." The elderly steward blinked. No duchess had ever thanked him before. That single sentence spread through the castle before sunset. The following morning, Eliza rose before sunrise. Instead of requesting expensive gowns or redecorating her chambers, she asked to see the estate accounts. Mr. Whitmore looked genuinely confused. "The financial records, Your Grace?" "Yes, they're rather lengthy. I enjoy reading." Within an hour, several ledgers covered the library table. Eliza spent most of the morning studying them. Numbers often revealed truths people preferred to hide. The duchy was one of the wealthiest in the kingdom. Its farms prospered. Its mines generated enormous income. Its trade routes remained secure because of Lucian's military leadership. Yet something troubled her. Several villages repeatedly requested repairs. An orphanage had received no additional funding in nearly 5 years. The castle gardens employed fewer workers every season. A village school roof had remained damaged through 2 winters. Nothing disastrous. Simply forgotten. When Lucian entered the library later that afternoon, he found Eliza surrounded by ledgers. "I thought you would be resting." She looked up with a smile. "I was curious." He glanced toward the books. Most people avoid estate accounts. They tell interesting stories. That answer earned the slightest lift of one eyebrow. "What story have they told you?" Eliza carefully closed one ledger. "You have protected your borders remarkably well." "I have. But while watching beyond your walls, you've had little time to look inside them." Lucian considered her words. Instead of becoming defensive, he simply nodded once. "You're correct." He had expected criticism. Instead, she'd merely stated a fact. Over the next several weeks, Eliza quietly began making changes. She never issued loud commands. She simply listened. She walked through servant corridors instead of remaining in noble drawing rooms. She visited kitchens. She learned stable workers' names. She asked gardeners which flowers grew best in different seasons. She thanked maids for their hard work. At first, everyone assumed the new duchess was merely being polite. Soon they realized she remembered every conversation. When a young maid mentioned her younger brother could not read, Eliza arranged evening literacy lessons. When the head cook admitted leftover bread was usually discarded, Eliza suggested sending it daily to nearby widows. When gardeners explained they lacked enough workers to restore neglected flower beds, Eliza organized volunteers from nearby villages who gladly accepted fair wages. Small improvements appeared everywhere. Within a month, the castle looked brighter. Within 2 months, people smiled more often. One rainy afternoon, Eliza requested a carriage. "I'd like to visit Brookhaven Village." Mr. Whitmore hesitated. "The roads are muddy. Then we should leave before they become worse." Word reached Lucian. "You intend to inspect villages yourself?" "I do." "You needn't." "I know." He folded his arms. "The roads aren't comfortable. I wasn't expecting comfort." Lucian almost smiled. "Almost. I'll accompany you." Brookhaven lay several miles from the castle. Children stopped playing when they saw the Duke's carriage. Most villagers immediately bowed. They clearly respected Lucian. They also seemed nervous around him. Eliza noticed. Instead of gathering everyone into a formal meeting, she walked through the marketplace. She purchased fresh bread, complimented a carpenter's craftsmanship, asked elderly women about this year's harvest. Soon conversations began naturally. The villagers forgot they were speaking to a duchess. They simply spoke with a kind woman who genuinely listened. One elderly widow apologized for the poor condition of her cottage roof. It leaks whenever it rains. Eliza looked upward. Several wooden beams had rotted. She quietly wrote a note. Nearby, children watched curiously. She smiled. Will anyone show me where you like to play? Within minutes, she found herself surrounded by laughing children proudly giving tours of their tiny village. Lucian observed everything from a distance. No speeches, no grand promises, just kindness. Strangely, people trusted her almost immediately. The changes spread beyond Brookhaven. School roofs were repaired before winter. Unused castle rooms became classrooms twice each week. War veterans unable to continue military service received employment maintaining roads and bridges. The orphanage finally received proper funding. Castle physicians visited surrounding villages monthly. Every improvement remained practical, nothing extravagant, yet the duchy slowly transformed. One evening, Lucian returned from inspecting the northern garrison. He expected the castle to be as silent as always. Instead, music floated through open windows. Not a grand performance. Someone in the servant hall was quietly playing the piano. Several maids laughed while arranging flowers. Gardeners discussed new roses blooming earlier than expected. The atmosphere felt alive. Mr. Whitmore approached. Welcome home, Your Grace. Lucian looked around. The castle seems different. It is... How? The steward smiled. Her Grace remembers everyone's name. That simple answer lingered with Lucian long after the conversation ended. Gradually, he began spending more time with Eliza. Sometimes breakfast lasted longer than usual. Sometimes they reviewed estate reports together. Sometimes they rode horseback through the countryside, inspecting farms. Their conversations remained calm. Neither forced friendship, neither pretended affection. Respect quietly grew between them. One evening they stood overlooking the western vineyards as sunset painted the hills gold. Lucian spoke unexpectedly. You never asked why I agreed to marry you. Eliza looked toward the distant fields. I assumed it no longer mattered. It does. She waited. You were honest. She blinked. When everyone else panicked, you simply offered a solution. He looked toward the horizon. I've spent enough years surrounded by people hiding their true intentions. Eliza smiled softly. I wasn't brave. No. I simply had nothing left to lose. For the first time, Lucian turned fully toward her. Something about those words sounded painfully familiar. Days later, Eliza discovered an old portrait hidden in one of the castle galleries. It showed a smiling young woman holding the hand of a boy no older than 8. Lucian, Mr. Whitmore, quietly explained. Her Grace, that was the late Duchess Ashcombe. His mother? Yes. She looks very kind. She was... And his father? The steward sighed. The late Duke believed emotions weaken leaders. Eliza understood more than he realized. Lucian had not been born cold. He had learned to survive that way. From that day forward, she never tried changing him. She simply remained herself. Patient, consistent, kind. Months passed. Word of Ashcombe's remarkable improvements spread throughout the kingdom. Travelers praised the duchy's clean villages. Merchants admired its fair trade policies. Even neighboring nobles quietly admitted the once-forgotten Lady Eliza had become an exceptional duchess. At court, people who had once whispered that she was merely a replacement bride now spoke her name with admiration. Ironically, those same rumors eventually reached Ravenscroft Manor. Lady Isabella listened in stunned silence as guests praised Ashcombe's beloved duchess. Lady Eliza has completely transformed the state. They say even the Duke smiles now. I hear the king himself complimented her charitable work. Isabella's smile slowly disappeared. She had imagined the Duke living alone in misery after she fled. Instead, the sister she had always overlooked had stepped into a life filled with respect, purpose, and growing happiness. Lord and Lady Ravenscroft exchanged uneasy glances. If Eliza had truly become one of the kingdom's most admired noble women, perhaps it was time to visit their eldest daughter, not out of affection, but because powerful family connections had suddenly become valuable again. Several days later, an elegant carriage bearing the Ravenscroft crest rolled through the gates of Ashcombe Castle. Watching from the library window, Lucian recognized the visitors before a servant even announced them. He glanced toward Eliza, whose calm expression revealed little. Then he looked back at the approaching carriage. For reasons he could not yet explain, one thought settled firmly in his mind. The people arriving today were not here because they had finally remembered Eliza. They were here because the rest of the kingdom had. The Ravenscroft carriage rolled to a graceful stop before Ashcombe Castle. Servants opened the doors as Lord Theodore and Lady Margaret Ravenscroft stepped onto the stone courtyard, wearing their finest clothing, warm smiles carefully arranged across their faces. To anyone watching, they appeared to be proud parents visiting their beloved daughter. Only Eliza knew how unfamiliar those smiles truly were. She greeted them with the same quiet courtesy she offered every guest. "Father, Mother, welcome to Ashcombe." Lady Margaret embraced her. "My dear Eliza, look at you. You look radiant." It was the first affectionate embrace Eliza could remember receiving from her mother. She returned it politely but without expectation. Lucian observed everything from a short distance. His expression remained unreadable. Yet something about the visit already felt carefully rehearsed. Dinner that evening was pleasant on the surface. The conversation centered on the flourishing duchy, successful harvests, and recent improvements throughout the villages. Lord Ravenscroft complimented the castle. Lady Margaret admired the restored gardens. Neither mentioned Isabella. Not until dessert arrived. Lady Margaret gently placed her teacup onto its saucer. "Eliza, your sister has suffered greatly these past months." Eliza looked at her quietly. "I'm sorry to hear that. She regrets many things." Lord Ravenscroft leaned forward. She was young and frightened. No one spoke for a moment. Finally, Lady Margaret continued, "Surely, families deserve second chances." Eliza understood immediately. "So this visit isn't truly about seeing me." Her parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. Lord Ravenscroft sighed. The kingdom expected Isabella to become Duchess of Ashcombe. That was before she made her own choice. People make mistakes. "They do." Lady Margaret smiled hopefully. Perhaps Isabella could spend some time here, rebuilding friendships. Eliza answered gently. This is her home as well. Relief spread across both parents' faces. Then Eliza calmly added, "As my guest." The smiles faded. Several days later, Isabella arrived. She was as beautiful as ever, dressed in fashionable gowns and carrying the same effortless confidence that had once captivated every noble gathering. Yet she seemed surprised by what she found. Servants genuinely respected Eliza. Villagers smiled whenever the Duchess appeared. Even Lucian sought Eliza's opinion before making important household decisions. None of it resembled the lonely marriage Isabella had imagined. One afternoon, Isabella found Eliza arranging books inside the castle library. "You've done well." Eliza smiled. "We've both worked hard. You could have had another life." "So could you." Isabella hesitated. "You really love it here?" Eliza looked around the peaceful library. "I've found purpose here. Not wealth, not status. Purpose." For the first time, Isabella struggled to find words. While family tensions quietly simmered, another challenge emerged. At the royal court, whispers began spreading that Duke Lucian Ashcombe had diverted military funds intended for border defenses. The accusations were unexpected, official, dangerous. Several influential nobles demanded an investigation. Lucian remained calm. "The accounts are accurate." Eliza believed him without hesitation. "I know, but proving it may take time." She smiled softly. "Then let's begin." For the next several days, husband and wife worked side by side. Estate ledgers covered the library once again. Lucian explained military logistics, while Eliza carefully compared reports, correspondence, and treasury records. Late one evening, she paused. "This payment appears twice." Lucian walked over. "It shouldn't." It wasn't duplicated. She pointed toward another document. It was redirected. Someone had copied official records while changing only a handful of numbers. Not enough to attract attention. Enough to create suspicion. It wasn't theft, Eliza whispered. It was designed to look like theft. Lucian looked at her with quiet admiration. I never would have noticed. You were looking for missing money. And you? I was looking for inconsistent handwriting. The investigation led them toward Lord Victor Blackthorne, an ambitious noble whose estates bordered Ashcombe lands. For years he had hoped to weaken Lucian's influence and acquire valuable trade routes. Rather than confronting him publicly, Eliza suggested patience. The truth speaks more clearly when people are allowed to reveal it themselves. Lucian trusted her judgment. At the next Royal Council meeting, financial officers carefully reviewed the original records alongside forged copies uncovered during the investigation. Witnesses confirmed that official seals had been altered after the documents left Ashcombe Castle. The accusations collapsed. Responsibility rested not with Lucian, but with those who had manipulated the records for political advantage. The king addressed the assembled nobles. Duke Ashcombe's honor remained beyond question. The hall echoed with respectful applause. After the council session ended, many nobles approached Eliza. Several openly praised her careful attention to detail. One elderly duchess smiled warmly. The kingdom is fortunate to have a lady who values truth over pride. Lucian quietly watched the admiration surrounding his wife. Months earlier, nearly everyone had viewed her as merely a replacement bride. Now they sought her advice, respected her judgment, trusted her character. None of it had been demanded. Every bit had been earned. The Ravenscrofts also attended the royal gathering. For the first time in years, they saw nobles speaking to Eliza before greeting them. The realization settled heavily upon them. Their overlooked daughter had become one of the kingdom's most respected women, not because of her title, because of who she was. Later, that evening, Lord Ravenscroft approached her privately. I misjudged you. Eliza looked at him calmly. You underestimated me. He lowered his eyes. Yes. I spent years hoping you would notice me. Silence stretched between them. I no longer need that. Her words carried no anger, only peace. Lord Ravenscroft understood that some opportunities, once ignored, never returned. A few days later, Isabella requested a walk through the castle gardens. Summer roses filled the pathways with color. I owe you an apology, Isabella said quietly. Eliza stopped beside a fountain. You don't owe me perfection. I spent my life believing everything good belonged to me. She laughed sadly. When I ran away, I thought I'd escaped a terrible future. She looked toward the castle. I never realized I was running away from the chance to become someone better. Eliza gently took her sister's hand. We cannot change yesterday. No, but we can choose tomorrow. The sisters parted with understanding rather than resentment. Their relationship would never erase the past, but it no longer needed to be defined by it. That evening, Ashcombe Castle hosted a celebration honoring the successful investigation. Village leaders, estate workers, and neighboring nobles gathered beneath glowing lanterns in the restored gardens. Children laughed beside the fountains. Music drifted across the summer air. Servants smiled freely as they welcomed guests. Standing before everyone, the king congratulated Duke Lucian. Lucian accepted the recognition before turning toward Eliza. There is someone else who deserves to be honored. The gathering grew quiet. He reached for Eliza's hand. Months ago, such a gesture would have seemed impossible. Now it felt entirely natural. I entered marriage believing I required only a practical alliance. His eyes remained on hers. I was wrong. The guests listened in complete silence. People searched for the most celebrated daughter. He smiled warmly. I found a woman with the strongest heart. Eliza's eyes shimmered with emotion. Lucian continued. My duchy became stronger because of her wisdom. My people became happier because of her kindness. And I became a better man because she never stopped believing there was goodness worth protecting. The applause that followed echoed through the gardens. As twilight settled over Ashcombe, the celebration slowly faded into the evening. Eliza and Lucian walked together onto the castle terrace, overlooking the villages below. Lights glowed warmly from cottages across the valley. The restored school stood proudly beside the church. Children's laughter still floated faintly through the gardens. Everything felt alive. Lucian looked toward his wife. "The day you said, 'I heard you needed a bride,' I believed I was solving a problem." Eliza smiled softly. "And now," he gently intertwined his fingers with hers, "now I know that day changed my life." She looked toward the peaceful duchy they had rebuilt together. For years she had believed being forgotten meant she had little value. She had measured herself by the attention she never received. Ashcombe had taught her something far greater. Worth was never determined by who noticed you first. It was revealed by how faithfully you remained yourself when no one was watching. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared beyond the hills, the once forgotten sister stood beside the man who now loved and respected her completely. Not because she had taken someone else's place, but because she had created one that no one else could ever fill.